Chaos, starring Neurotoxin and Joe Ryan. Edge of Chaos is a free-flowing discussion occasionally dealing with mature topics. Okay, hello again everybody. Welcome back to the Edge of Chaos. I am, of course, Joe Ryan here with Neurotoxin.
Hello.
Or Shutdown Spectacular. Or seemingly inevitable Shutdown Spectacular, and obviously we can't speculate right now, you know, it being the end of the month. Tomorrow's the 1st of October. Who knows what's going to happen, how long, if it's going to shut down. Sure seems like it, but what do you think so far? What are you seeing?
Well, obviously, first of all, we're recording this show on the eve of the shutdown. We're watching these things very closely as they happen, as the events roll out. I am going to speculate that the shutdown does happen. I just can't really tell you how long it's going to be. It could be a couple of hours, could be a few days. It's very difficult for me to predict how it's going to go down. I think it will happen. However, I really can't make a prediction whether or not by the time this show is aired, by the time you're listening to it, whether or not we're still shut down. A shutdown for a couple of hours is really insignificant.
Well, it may be like that, and it may be one of those times where they're like going to midnight or going to 2 a.m. And, you know, is it... explain to me and maybe the rest of our listeners how this isn't just another bit of political theater. I mean, I don't know. You know, the more I look at this and listen to everything, it just... Don't we do this dance every few months now? It almost seems like it's a new reality show called Capital Shitheads or something like that.
Yeah, I like that.
They just bumble around and say, this week someone doesn't want a bill to pass and the government shuts down. How long will that last? And who will get voted off the island next? You know.
Yeah, that's going to be a hit. Well, first of all, Joe, are you saying they're actually going to have to work through the night? All those fat guys in Armani suits making $200,000 a year to posture in front of the cameras might actually have to work through the night after they work through the weekend? Oh my God, the terror! You know,
$200,000 declared dollars a year.
Well, yeah, that's just in their salaries, right?
This isn't working through the night like Ted Cruz, quote-unquote, worked through the night on that unpaid campaign contribution paid for political advertisement that he did a few days ago there.
Well, that was, I mean, even that, still, that's working through the night. Either way, they're actually having to stay up late and work. Oh, my God, the terror. See, I think to start, you know, to kind of address what you said about, we're going through this all the time. We are. I feel like that's a good thing. I feel like the Congress is actually doing its job because we're supposed to have contention. There's not supposed to be just instant agreement and consensus on everything. The reason, in my opinion, that this keeps happening is because the federal government has way more functions than it should, than it was ever intended to. Our system is intentionally built to be contentious. We think it's a majority rule system, but it's really not. If you think about it, you have two houses, and you have the president, and then it can still be overturned by the Supreme Court, and you have all the committee systems. So it's intentionally meant to make it difficult to pass laws, which is good for laws, like when we had that whole the gun control thing where they just, you know, said, oh crap, we need gun control, and they tried to pass it really quickly to get past this whole system, and it stopped it. It was derailed. So it's bad for government budgets, but the solution is not to expedite the system, because that would just eliminate all the checks and balances that we desperately need to keep the government under control. So in my opinion, this is how it should be. This is why we need a smaller federal government with fewer functions and a smaller budget. Because if it works the way it's supposed to, this is what's going to happen when it's this size.
I guess I look at this and I sort of go, like, I understand where you're coming from to some degree, and you won't see me disagree that the government does too much where they're trying to slash food stamps yet again, and yet they're upping the subsidies to agribusiness. It's like, really? Seriously? How's that not just basically showing a middle finger at, you know, Joe Schmo everyday American? And that basically just, you know, turning around and giving a wad of cash to your donors. And so obviously the system is rotten as it is. But I guess sometimes I just wish for a benevolent dictatorship where shit just got done because it's
Yeah,
like
see,
they say like Hitler, he was a horrible guy, but the trains ran on time.
trains ran on time. See, this is what this is what I'm concerned with, Joe. I'm concerned that a lot of Americans are starting to think the way that you just spoke, that they just want government to work. We don't need government to work. We need government to butt out of all these functions. But because we're dependent on government for all these functions and every single problem that would be caused by the shutdown, I will track down back to the fact that some regulation prevents the free market from dealing with this. I was arguing with one of our Facebook patrons this week, and you were helping me this weekend over Obamacare. And my finale to that was that all the need for Obamacare comes from the fact that healthcare is too expensive. It's way more expensive than a lot of other countries because it's regulated to death. And same thing with food stamps and agricultural regulations and subsidies. So we've built this dependence, and it's been around so long, so many generations, no one even realizes the free market could do it just fine, but you have to repeal the regulations, not the taxes, not the funding. And then, because people are dependent on this, they're scared of the government shutting down, they just want to expedite it and give it more power, like in a benevolent dictatorship, to make it work. This is how dictatorships come to power.
For me, the one argument against, or you're saying consensus, how you have to agree, is Obamacare itself, because Obamacare itself was a consensus built to some degree, to some degree, and they're bitching about it now. But if you look at what Obamacare actually is, it's a private subsidy to health to HMOs. That's what the Republicans were proposing back in the 90s. That was dole care. That was, and so now it's not good enough for them. But then again, they've moved to the rights and say, but
different Republicans. But yeah,
be that as it may, it's already the worst of both worlds. So to me, it's an indictment of compromise, not an evidence of, like they say, Obama just rammed it through and it's all him. I don't think if it was truly a liberal policy, it would be single payer. It would be Medicare for all type of thing, and it's not. And the reason why I hate it is for that reason. It's just a private handout.
Well.
And a mandate against middle class people, and so I hate it for that reason. I mean, there's a lot of fault to be found on both sides of that one.
Well, if we want to talk about that real quick, and I agree with you. I mean, I don't know how much of a compromise it was. It was very much a partisan thing, and that was just a pendulum swinging in favor of the Democrats after we had the glory of the Bush years with the Republicans in power and all the garbage they did. But Obamacare, you hit the nail right on the head. It's nothing more than a corporate subsidy. But the reason for that corporate subsidy, and the mandate is very important. See, the way, let's veer off for a second and talk about the healthcare system and why I hate Obamacare, since you pointed out yours. We do not have a healthcare crisis in this country. No matter how much people tantrum that we do, we don't. We have a simple regulation-induced shortage, and it has nothing to do with whether it's public or private. If you look at other countries, some of the most successful single-payer systems are either in Scandinavia, Japan,
France
is one. France is actually, it's very, very complicated. It's not as simple as a single payer.
I think France is kind of somewhat of a mix.
Yes, France is actually more like Obamacare, and it's a clusterfuck. Switzerland is a big one. The countries that are actually relatively conservative, the Netherlands, those places have very, very effective single-payer systems. Now, for one, they're a lot smaller than the U.S. They're more like the size of a U.S. state. But even leaving that alone, the costs of healthcare, the costs of procedures, the costs of seeing a doctor over there are about 1/4 or 1/5 what they are over here. And everything else over there costs an arm and a leg.
So why is the AMA?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. It's part of it. It's the regulations. First of all, there are multiple schools of medicine. You know how we think of Chinese medicine and alternative medicine and chiropractic and acupuncture and all this stuff, and we think it's like snake oil peddling? Over there, they actually consider that healthcare and medicine.
Acupuncture's moved its way in, but that's a derail, sorry.
Just the amount that it's taken just for them to accept acupuncture as medicine just proves my point. It's
taken, 30 years?
Right. That just proves my point. There's so much more there. There's so many different types of providers, and I'm not against traditional Western healthcare. But when you give that school of thought a monopoly, it's going to be more expensive. And then within just your basic Western school of medicine, and then pharmacology is a big one too, versus more natural, more homeopathic methods of intervention. Between those two things being our only school of medicine, we also have massive regulations reducing the amount that even in that is provided. For example, med schools. Larry Elder wrote about this. purposely keep their admissions low, allegedly
Yes.
to protect the consumer.
That's
But
the AMA, yes.
right. See,
They only
that
accept
shit,
X amount per year, and they decide who it is, how many, they set the number.
right.
And it's an unanswerable body, unelected,
Yeah, it's a board, and
Right.
and FDA does similar shit with pharmaceuticals. So what you have is it's a price control. Yeah, it's supposed to protect the consumers, but what we end up doing is we have just far less doctors and any kind of providers per capita than really any other developed country in the world. So the result is that healthcare costs an arm and a leg. Now, when it costs an arm and a leg, you're going to have a lot of people that can't afford to pay for it. How you pay for it is a secondary problem. We need to get rid of those regulations. The AMA cannot have a monopoly on how we define healthcare. That's stupid. When we get rid of that and prices come down and we have, our minority that's uninsured drops down to about 5 or 6%, like it was in those countries when they introduced single payer plans, then we can worry about how to cover those people. What this is, it's not just a handout to the same corporations, because it's gotten so expensive that people are finding ways around it. They're going to Mexico and to Brazil to get their medical procedures done. They're ordering their pharmaceuticals from India. Because it's the same shit. Yeah, it doesn't have the FDA stamp of approval, and that's great because that cuts the price down into the 1/4.
That's and here's the thing I heard from a couple other people. I'm kind of combining things here.
Sure.
From Mar and then a guest on Mar last week. So Mar from this week and a guest from Mar last week, and it was actually Chris Hayes who hosts All In on MSNBC.
Uh-huh.
What he was saying is part of the idea of Obamacare, and leaving aside, it's a private handout and all that stuff. It's risk pooling. When you pull in young people,
yes,
they're basically, the idea is, yeah, you're kind of bankrolling an old infirm person, but the idea being, you're the future. There's more of you, and you're spreading things around a little bit, and that's socialist a little bit. And I guess how Mar put that was, it's spreading the pain around a little, because before it was the haves and the have-nots. It's, you have health care because you fall into, one of several categories and you can't be excluded for a bullshit reason and blah, 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 blah. Now they can't. The idea, the compromise, the one good thing they're saying about it is, well, okay, yeah, it's a private handout, but now they can't just kick you off for any old reason. They can't, not accept you for a pre-existing condition. There's more time you're on your parents through college, stuff like that, where these people were just kind of let to fall through the cracks before. And now if you're young, what's the idea is, well, you could just have catastrophic care for less money, is the conservative counter-argument to that. But I don't know. Is there any merit at all, even if this isn't the system, to because the idea being we're all in this together is how Chris Hayes put it.
Yeah,
but
see, it's an ideological idea. Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't necessarily entirely disagree with the idea that you have younger people paying for their health insurance and they're bankrolling an older and more infirm person. The idea of risk pooling makes sense, and that's how healthcare works. That's how any insurance works. You pay for car insurance. That's risk pooling too, which is why when you have things like Katrina happen, insurance companies start going bankrupt because they can't actually afford to pay everyone. I have no problem with risk pooling. The issue here is there is plenty of risk pooling in the free market. You can't force people to pool risk. And Marr is notorious for this. I don't really know who Chris Hayes is that well. Marr is notorious for this. He's notorious for misrepresenting policy and stating its intentions as if they're its outcomes. The mandate is complete bullshit, and the young are not going to obey it. It's completely unenforceable. The IRS has no teeth to enforce it. No one actually tells the truth on their tax returns. No one, ever. No American has ever done that. You haven't done it. I haven't done it. Come on, yeah.
You want to get an audit? Are you crazy?
No, it's nobody does it, and everyone knows that no one does it.
I am a faithful, law-abiding taxpayer who completely tells the truth.
Yes. Joe and I are the only two
NSA,
Americans.
I'm completely honest on my tax return.
Joe and I are the only two Americans, the only two men in America who tell the truth on our tax returns. But all the other Americans, everyone else,
all you other liars out there.
Yes, exactly.
You know what you are.
Right. So, and all they can do is penalties, like for underpaying taxes. They can't even go after you criminally. The criminal division cannot go after you. So, and there's that. There's also the fact that you have probably about between 15% and 20% of Americans, counting the undocumented, who don't even file tax returns, ever. They don't file tax returns.
I do have a friend that's in that category, so you're right. I mean, it's an imperfect way
and
of it.
that proportion, that category of people tends to overlap with people who don't have health insurance. So the ones you're trying to enforce against, they're not even filing tax returns. So you see how this, even though in theory it sounds great and fails in practice. Now, the reason the young don't pay for health care, there's this idiot stereotype among baby boomers. Oh, those young people, they think they're invincible. No, that's complete crap.
They don't need it as much.
Right. Well, the thing is, they have a need for it, but they do a little cost-benefit analysis, and they say, look, I could get sick, and I could need health insurance, but it costs an arm and a leg, so I'm going to take the risk. So if the costs were less, then young people, arguably, and this is quantitative, there would still be the invincible young, but a lot more people would choose to pay for healthcare, buy healthcare, and whether or not they understand they're bankrolling an old infirm person, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that idea of risk pooling is great, but it has to be market driven. Now, the reason I disagree with this being a single-payer plan, I actually almost think that would be worse. I'm really not sure which one is worse. It really is a choice between a giant douche and a turd sandwich. It's because what you're doing is you're basically guaranteeing tax dollars to that same corporate cartel that's driving up healthcare prices. I don't see how that's okay to do. I like the idea of derailing them through competition. If we break Obamacare, we break that cartel. Because they are already on their last breath. That's why they pushed through Obamacare. That's why all the healthcare providers and all the insurance companies were in favor of Obamacare. It's a guaranteed subsidy.
Well, and they were in on the when they were having the not hearings, the kind of initial meetings of drawing up Obamacare. All the insiders were in there.
Oh yeah.
Those reports are coming out as it was happening.
Right.
They were like closed-door meetings where they were hashing over kind of the bits and pieces. Yeah, all those guys, were in there, all their representatives. But so here's a question, a philosophical question for you. Would you be more okay with it if it were, say, a block grant to the states with some kind of suggested infrastructure kind of? You could run it this way. This is our idea. This is our kind of template, but it's up to you to figure it out. Would you be more okay with that or less okay with that?
Definitely not less, but probably not more either. We have that. It's called Medicaid, and it has a terrible track record.
Does it depend on the state though? Like, what if
right.
California always, I thought, got good marks for its Medicaid?
Because California is what Medicaid was modeled after. Medi-Cal actually predates Medicaid. And Medi-Cal was an excellent system until the feds came in and ordered it to work the way Medicaid does, even though they modeled Medicaid after it, the same way they modeled Obamacare after the Massachusetts system. So states that want to have it, they're going to have it anyway. They don't need a block grant. They don't need a federal mandate. States that don't want to have it, it's going to suck in. That's what
that enable them to expand it, though. We're saying we're about risk pooling.
Well,
with the additional monies, you know what I mean?
Right, but the inefficiency will more than make up for it if states are trying to block it. And look at what states are doing with Obamacare.
True, like Texas, it'd be a good idea of a state of the anti-California.
Right,
just as big, but they're blocking it at every turn.
They are. They're actually the biggest state that's blocking it. A lot of other smaller states are too. My thing is this: we need to address the price problem. We need to address the regulations that are driving up the prices so these corporate cartels can keep getting fat. No matter how much supposed liberals, but they're actually centrists that are in bed with this cartel, want to guilt me that I want to deny health care coverage to the poor. I'm not buying into it. They're the ones denying health care coverage by driving up the prices. I want to break the cartels. I want to break the corporatocracy. And whoever's left poor at that point that has denied access will deal with them then. Let the market deal with whatever it can deal with before you have intervention. Intervention is the problem. You can't have more intervention to deal with it. So when we drive down prices, my personal view is that a lot more states, and where you have more conservative states, it'll be more at the local level, will have their own means of risk pooling. I'm not against risk pooling. I just think federally it doesn't work. This country's too big. It's too diverse. You can't tell Alabama and California and Alaska to all do the same thing and expect good results.
Yeah, and I think part of moving a little bit to the political side of things, Obama just made way too many promises based on it that he had no way of guaranteeing. Wow. He's saying how, like, if we want to move on to the topic of businesses who are slashing their workers' hours so they can get them under that 30-hour-a-week threshold of having to offer some kind of health care. They're basically just saying, you know what, we're going to cut you. That way we can just pay the penalty. and or I think in that case they don't have to pay any penalty.
Well,
And then you're on your own. You have to buy from the marketplace.
it goes back, or from the exchange. It goes back to the same thing. It goes back to the fact that you have that's another mandate, the business mandate, that's also failing because enough businesses, everyone doesn't have to find a way out of it. Enough businesses will find a way out of it for the predictions made by the CBO and the GAO for those to fail, for the numbers to be wrong. And when I was arguing with people about this 2-3 years ago, and they were constantly citing those numbers. Look, the CBO says this won't bankrupt the government. The CBO says this will work. And I'm like, look, they're not accounting for the unintended consequences. And no one wants to hear that. But, Social Security didn't account for the unintended consequences. When we first had Social Security, when we introduced it, we only had 20% of Americans, think about that, only 20% that did not have some sort of private pension or retirement plan. And Social Security that's why it's called security, was supposed to pick up the people that were left behind. And now, 80 years later, only about 20% of working Americans actually have any sort of private pension plan or 401k. That's insane. We've completely hoisted that responsibility onto the government and is doing a terrible job. And unlike Social Security, healthcare will bite you right away. It's not going to wait a generation.
So I guess and the other thing I was going to talk about when I was talking about the politics of this, he Obama is painted himself into a corner, and this is kind of where I think a lot of the rancor on the other side, where these guys are putting they're planting their feet and they're saying no, we're going to defund or repeal this one way or another, is that he wasn't straight up with a lot of he kind of parroted a lot of the facts and figures, but before a lot of them were clear, and when he said to people, oh, your plan won't change, nothing will change, nothing will change. Of course it'll change. I kept hearing that at the time, going, wait a minute, what? You're making a massive, shift in, how they dole out healthcare, the rules of it, how many people you're covering, and nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And I hated it for its, for the mandate of buying private healthcare. I mean, I thought it didn't go far enough as far as if you want to do government healthcare, do it. But that's my opinion, obviously. That's where we disagree. But,
Right, but
don't you find a lot of maybe the current dissatisfaction? And, I mean, this is why these guys were elected, the current guys that are now thorns in his ass, saying, no, fuck you, we're not going to fund this.
right,
They were elected based on the fact that people, heard one thing and they just, they knew either A, it's impossible, or B, they just didn't want to hear it and wanted it gone.
Yeah, I'm going to veer into political strategy for a moment here and just explain how this situation works. And it relates very closely to Obamacare. There's a few things going on. So first of all, I've sat on a number of local health boards and mental health boards, and these are advisory boards. These are not political boards. And there's a lot of providers involved in them and people who do health care and therapy and all kinds of stuff. And I remember talking about this about 6 months ago, where we had actually, most of the people on this board are avid supporters of Obamacare. I was probably one of 3 or 4 people in the room that opposes it in any way. And they're not very political. They're healthcare people. And we actually hired a guy to present to us all the different things that Obamacare is going to do, how it's going to change. And this guy, who's also a big supporter of it, saying, look, it's such a clusterfuck because of the way it's being implemented. Here are all the things that are going to happen, that are going to make people uncomfortable, that are going to leave gaps in coverage even for a couple of months for people, that are going to leave a lot of unpaid hospital bills for several months. I'm not going to get into all the details because it's a lot of stuff. Just the way it was written was very, very poor because it was passed in a rush. And Republicans wanted that. When it was passed, they wanted it passed in a rush because it would make it more unpopular after it was passed. So in a sense, that's also a political victory. They forced him to make a bad law worse when they passed it. Obama and his Democrats in the House and in the Senate. So what this guy was predicting, and he was absolutely right, that Obamacare's popularity would plummet around this time, September, October, end of this year, because it starts to get implemented, and it's such a bureaucratic clusterfuck. And he was trying to come up with strategies for how we basically keep it from getting derailed, but he wasn't really, from what I heard, the guy's not a political strategist, he's a healthcare guy. I was listening to him like, this is not going to work. Obamacare is going to go away. It's going to become too unpopular. It's already unpopular, and it's going to fall right on this budget battle, and Republicans are going to capitalize on it. Now, the reason Republicans are capitalizing on this, specifically why Obamacare, because it's one of the few issues where Republicans are still together. If you think about this partisan split, desperately trying to keep their party together. And this is almost a uniquely partisan issue. There's hardly anything else, there's hardly any other issues that are as partisan as this issue. So that's the strategy. And what they're basically, I honestly, although I vehemently oppose Obamacare, I don't necessarily have a side in the shutdown battle because some of the things Republicans have done I'm very much against, like the food stamps issue, which we can talk about in a moment. But I think that strategically, Republicans are going to win. They're going to get what they want here because their base, like you said, is more radicalized and they're more okay with a shutdown. Whereas Democrats, their base, if a shutdown is forced, is going to be upset with the Democrats for allowing the shutdown, as well as Republicans, but they wouldn't have voted for Republicans anyway.
I kept hearing, though, that a lot of neoconservative types, the Hannah-fuck types, basically trying to talk their way around how do we not get blamed for a shutdown and then lose seats later on? Like, not take the political hit for that. I guess everyone keeps worrying, and Obama himself seems to be like, okay, fine, shut it down. I'll just keep saying you're irresponsible, and the American people will get pissed, and eventually, since you're the one saying no, 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 they'll all blame you. I guess that's his idea. Is that actually going to happen, do you think, or is it? I mean, Newt always says, for some reason, the history of the 95 shutdown is that the Republicans took a political hit, but yet they gained seats in the next election. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I always hear those two things, and it's like, well, wait a minute, did they take a hit or not?
They did, yeah, they gained seats, so obviously they didn't take a hit. See, that's the thing. Obama and even like Harry Reid, Dick Durbin, they're trying to control the narrative. They really both sides are doing this. What this is, it's a game of chicken. Neither of them has even really talked about the policies, whether it's Obamacare or anything else, about in the shutdown for weeks. They're basically both ping-ponging this back and forth and trying to blame each other. The strategy is not to stop the shutdown for either side. The strategy, this is why I'm pretty sure it's going to happen, the strategy is to make sure the other side takes the blame. Now, Obama personally doesn't care. He's term limited. He can't run again. But I feel like in Congress, Republicans are not going to take the blame. They are going to win as a result of this. Further, you're going to have more primary rebellion in the Democrats as a result, because it'll cause more of a split in the Democrats because a lot of their base will be unhappy with their own politicians, but they won't vote for Republicans. Right. So I feel like this is the strategy for both sides. Republicans are hoping the Democrats get blamed. Democrats are hoping Republicans get blamed. No one's even trying to stop the shutdown. But what'll happen, in my opinion, in that game, Republicans win again because their base is more radicalized. And if you think who is more okay with a shutdown happening, Republican base or Democrat base?
Well,
think about that.
Base, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. Moreover,
and that's their goal. I mean, really, if you think about it, it's this Randian dream of no government anywhere, ever.
I don't know if that's really a Republican thing. That might be my goal, but that's not Republican. It's just their base is more.
It's cute and unrealistic, but yeah, it is your goal.
Oh, shush. Now, it's just like public single-payer health care as a corporate handout. It does not work as a corporate handout with the health care prices that we have.
Agreed.
Right, so that's as much of a dream as this. Now, what I'm saying, and it does not work in a country remotely this size. In any case, so you have the radicalized base, and the neocon, which, like I said, there's very few of them left, really. They're now a tiny minority, and this is I find very satisfying.
The Boehners, the Cantors of the party.
Well, Boehners and Cantors are pretty much marching to the beat of the Thomas Massey drums at this point. They're done being neocons. It's more like the Peter Kings and the Mike Rogers and the John McCains. That's all that's left. And those, like I said, this makes me happy because it's just watching that neocon skeleton get carried out in a body bag. It's like, bye.
You won't see me crying about it, that's for sure.
Yeah, fuck them. But they are, if anyone is desperately trying to stop the shutdown, it's them because they can't win. Government shuts down, and if Republicans let's say Republicans do take some of the blame, it's the moderate Republicans because the radicalized base, they're going to vote for the Tea Party Republicans. But these guys, they can't win. They vote with Democrats, they're getting voted out. They're blamed for the shutdown, they're getting voted out. They have nothing left. They're just trapped in between these two fires. Which, like I said, that's either getting exactly what they deserve. So I have no complaints there.
What do you make of Ted Cruz overall? And his little speechifying?
Well, what I think he was doing, pretty plain and simple. is he was buying up time. He was just trying to eat up time, slow this down, make sure the shutdown happens. That's all it was. He's trying to keep the Democrats from having this narrative, oh, look, those mean Republicans are going to shut down. He was trying to give them less time to do that. Simple as that. His filibuster was not going to succeed.
And it wasn't a filibuster even. It was just him talking.
Right, him talking. So,
but so for me, two reactions. Mm-hmm. Number one, like I said, it seemed like a unpaid for or maybe paid for by the taxpayer campaign ad.
Oh, that
for
too,
his
yes.
Presidential ambitions in 2016. So there's that. And also, it struck me as ironic and interesting that a guy who is decrying a policy that's barely gotten started and hasn't really, and not to get off on a tangent on that, but hasn't even really been fully implemented yet, mm-hmm. reading Green Eggs and Ham. Obviously, he didn't finish that book.
I never thought of that. That's
because its whole thing's like you won't even try it. You don't even know what it's like, and you're decrying it. It's just kind of funny. You got to admit that's funny. Ironic. Anyway,
although I agree with him completely on Obamacare. That shit needs to go.
That kind of strikes me as a guy who is. It seems to me in this, let's call it a Tea Party revolution, even though I hate that fucking term.
Okay.
That there are the pretenders and the true believers. Now, who's a true believer? Anyone with the last name of Paul?
Of course.
Would be a good example, I'd say A and B, of true believers. Now, who's a pretender? Dipshit, vice presidential candidate. I can't remember his name for some reason right now.
Paul Ryan.
Yeah, that first name Paul, bad. Last name Paul, good.
Wrong Paul, yeah.
Paul Ryan, pretender. He's surfing that wave. He's cloaking himself.
Well, he tried, and he got wiped out majorly. He had a major wipeout.
You know, honestly, to me, Ted Cruz seems like another one of those guys.
See, no, I disagree with you.
Because I don't know, he's always mugging for the camera. Whereas Rand, he actually did a filibuster, and it was for something a lot more meaningful, drones, which is, to me, a lot bigger threat, to, let's say, freedom. But
okay, but that's you're talking ideology as opposed to strategy. See, Joe, I think that there's different sides to the Tea Party. Like I said before, my definition of the Tea Party is really more about stubbornness and unwillingness to compromise. And technically, even neocons can be Tea Party if they stand on their ideas. I disagree with their ideas, but Tea Party is more about lack of compromise and less about your political ideology. So Ted Cruz is different from Rand Paul. He's very much represents the social conservative side of the Tea Party. He's more like a Mike Huckabee kind of guy, where he's really not remotely as libertarian as Rand Paul. They coalition on a lot of stuff. But more like Mike Lee, maybe James DeMint.
But he wants to control women's vaginas, for one thing.
I don't know. I haven't done the research on him specifically. A lot of the guys in that group certainly do. I just don't know about him. But specifically talking about strategy, he has a different strategy than Rand Paul. A lot of politicians have different political strategies. So what? Now, I agree with you completely. A lot of this was basically him setting up for a 2016 presidential run. But again, politicians do that. You could say Rand Paul was doing that with his filibuster too. What's going to happen, I think, in 2016 is they're both going to run, but they're friends, they're allies, they do a lot of stuff together. So when one of them will bow out eventually and endorse the other. And unlike what we saw in the previous Republican primaries, they will actually get along, their campaigns will get along, they won't mudsling each other, and their voters will get along. So you might not agree with a lot of stuff on him. On a lot of stuff with him, I certainly don't agree, like I said, with controlling women's vaginas and a lot of his social conservative stuff. But I think strategy-wise, I think he's doing pretty well.
I guess it's a matter of perspective. I think he's an empty suit, personally, but that's just me.
I don't think that's your view of him personally as a politician, and that's fine.
Right.
That's a matter of perspective. I think that the effectiveness of his political strategy is an objective thing. It's not a matter of perspective. It's how well does this work to propel him.
It's effective. I mean, it's gotten the guy tons of media coverage. I mean, that's why he did it. He's right. Now at the top of all the polls, or, when they ask Republicans, who do you want to run, he's number one now over Rand Paul being number two.
Over Rand Paul, right. So when you have those two guys as number one and number two, the neocons are finished. Marco Rubio is not running. That's the Chris
Boy,
Christie.
they throw
It's
their
hardly
darlings
news.
overboard pretty quick, don't they? First it was Chris Christie, then it was Marco Rubio. They were
But
there.
yeah, but Rand Paul has been there pretty consistently. So what I'm saying is, I think what he did, whether or not you agree with his views, and I have a love-hate relationship with his views, but strategy-wise, I respect the strategy. Strategy has to be effective. It can't be what you and I respect or like them doing. It has to be effective. Just like what I'm seeing here, even though with the naked eye, it looks like two small children fighting in a sandbox over a doll until they break it.
It does. It really
But
does.
right, just the parties in Congress right now, but it's an effective strategy. Strategy has to account for the average American. It's not going to account for us.
I think I quote Dennis Miller where it's like, you look at Congress right now, and it looks like one of those old Escher paintings with the two flocks of geese flying at each other.
Yes.
It makes no sense, and it occasionally shits on your head. Pretty much.
That's great, Joe. I love it. But you know what? Again, unfortunately, we have a political situation. We have a country. I'm not going to comment on whether I think it's always been that way. That this is effective. This works because there's a lot of still partisan radicalization. So if you cause this situation, a lot of people will blame the other side as opposed to blame the politicians for not being able to do their jobs. So that's what's going to happen. That to me, it happens because it's effective, because it works. The fact that we don't like it is kind of irrelevant.
Totally different topic, real quick. This isn't popping in my
Certainly.
head. Did you see John Kerry on 60 Minutes?
No, I didn't. The God blessed me again. I
didn't notice this before, but that dude has a wonky eye.
Huh? What do you mean by
Dude
that?
has a wonky eye. He's got one eye that doesn't look straight.
Oh,
He's got one eye that's kind of off to the side there.
He's just looking more zombified every day, doesn't he? Jeez.
Yeah, he looks really
walking corpse. But yeah,
it was funny. He was talking about his I guess it was meant to be kind of a puff piece of look at how great he handled this Syria thing. Really, I thought it made him. Thought it just made him look stupid.
Wow.
Because he asked him, I think one of the questions was, and these are softballs. It's CBS. What do you expect? He's like, how off the cuff was that thing you said where you magooed your way into a solution of, well, they can give up all their chemical weapons right now and blah blah blah, and we wouldn't bomb them. And his answer basically confirmed that he just pulled that out of his ass in that moment. Like, he tried to make it seem like, oh, well, it was an honest answer, and it's not like I planned it, but hey, then again, he asked me the question, and I came up with the answer all by myself, and blah, blah, blah. I was just sitting like, oh my god, just stop talking.
Well, my dog.
He is Mr. Magoo.
Really, my dog took a shit. And it kind of spelled out, give up your chemical weapons. Is that what he's saying? I mean, that's what that sounds like. It's not him who should be getting the credit. It's his dog for taking a shit. This is, come on. He did. I wouldn't even say he magooed his way into a solution. I would say Vladimir Putin, whom I despise, but he's a much better politician than John Kerry or our president, saw this opportunity and walked right into it and said, okay, look, this is how I'm going to make myself look like I have balls when Obama doesn't. And it's so sad that he succeeded.
It is pretty sad.
It's pathetic. Yeah.
What do you think of Obama and the president of Iran talking by phone for the first time in, like, what is it, since 1979, I think.
I think we're kind of rambling around topics, but to go back to Syria for a moment, I think, honestly, John Kerry didn't, quote-unquote, magoo his way into a solution. He magooed his way into Obama pretending to gracefully bow out of wanting to intervene in Syria, because that wasn't going to happen. Right. Congress was going to
give him a trap door, didn't he? Yeah, kind of.
Right, that's all it was. It wasn't a way. He didn't win. It wasn't a solution. It was a way for Obama to avoid looking like a complete idiot. Maybe like 80% as opposed to 90%.
Partial idiot.
Right, exactly. It was sick. Now, I haven't followed the news coming out of Iran. I've just been busy, and I've been following this whole domestic politics with Obamacare and the shutdown. I feel like, I don't know a whole lot about this new president of Iran. I do know a lot about Iranian politics. This specific guy I don't know a whole lot about.
Funny. And he recently said that he's now not denying the Holocaust, but then he put these riders on it that's basically still anti-Semitic. But it's progress, kind of, isn't it?
Okay,
I don't know.
You could put a monkey into the presidency in Iran, and it'd be progress over Ahmadinejad.
Well,
This is the thing.
that being said, right, yeah.
I have a really difficult time, okay, giving Obama or really anyone credit for things being better now, because when Ahmadinejad is not there, Ahmadinejad is not there. That's all it takes. He makes George W. Bush look like a fucking Mensa member. It's pathetic. This guy is just. And the thing is, if you know a little bit about Iranian history, before Ahmadinejad, you had a couple of presidents who were actually relatively liberal, relatively moderate. They were trying to find peace with the U.S. and Israel. They were trying to open up the country to more Western religion. They did a lot to open it up and calm things down. And the Ayatollah Khomeini was actually somewhat okay with it for a while. And then he felt they were becoming a threat because it was becoming basically too liberal. So he pushed through Ahmadinejad because that asshole was the only person he could trust to do his bidding. And he did it for a while, and then they fell out toward the end. So I'm hopeful that that this is going to basically make Iran more moderate again and make them open to talks. And Ali Khamenei, the current Ayatollah, is, from what I've read, from what I've heard, he's very sick. He's not that old, but he's very ill. And he's kind of expected to keel over. And when he does, all hell's going to break loose because there's really no one to replace him. They're going to have a very difficult time voting in a new Ayatollah, which is not a popular election. It's the council. So
the mullahs, yeah.
Right. So it's kind of cool that you have a president that's somewhat moderate and it's a decent politician, unlike Ahmadinejad, and doesn't just wave his dick around and alienate everyone for when that happens. Because Iran is going to go through a transition. It's just, I'd like to see that happen peacefully.
It's funny how quickly this story got buried, but don't you remember when Ahmadinejad was elected? One of the Iranian hostages in the 1970s came out and said that was totally one of the hostage takers.
Probably. I'm surprised. I mean,
the thing about that story, it was never brought up after he was the first elected, but I kept remembering that. I'm like, why are we treating this guy with legitimacy? Isn't he one of the hostage takers,
yeah,
supposedly?
I mean, yeah. And just in general, even if he weren't one of the hostage takers, the crap he said, I mean, I've worked with schizophrenics that made more sense. This guy...
he was like, Israel should... And really, he what was he but a convenient cipher, a convenient... punching bag for the Hannitys of the world to seem moral and strident and righteous and American. He's like, he wants Israel to perish in a ball of fire and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, he's a fucking nutcase.
He's an idiot. It's not just that, he's an
idiot. What do you think he's going to say?
Idiot. He doesn't even know how to say that in a way that doesn't sound like that. Now, here's the thing. My other hope for this is that Israel, the idiots in charge of Israel, and this is, I have friends who are Israeli, I have family in Israel, so I get into it all the time. And I tell them, look, I don't have to like your government to be for Israel, just like I don't have to like Obama to be a U.S. patriot. It's the dumbest double standard. As soon as you say something about the idiots in charge of Israel, oh, you're pro-Iran and you're anti-Semitic. It's like, no, I'll show you some people that are anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic. I'm not one of them. Your government's a bunch of idiots, though, and I'll say that even if you don't like it. So you basically have Sean Hannity on steroids in charge of Israel. His name is Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister. This guy's a psychopath. But because he had Ahmadinejad as an effigy to burn, every time someone came out against him politically to point out that his dick waving is only endangering Israel, it's not doing anything to protect it or make things better, he'd say, oh, you see that asshole over there? You want to go tell him? You want to go reason with him? So now that you have a guy in charge of Iran who, again, I don't know a whole lot about him, but at least he sounds like he's a decent politician, and he's not just going to wave his dick.
He's smooth. Yeah, he's got a smoothness to him.
I'm hoping someone more moderate can come to power in Israel that can maybe mend this situation a little bit. Because the government of Israel, what I mean by government is the coalition in charge of their parliament, they've got to go. It's not a matter of getting, I'm not talking about wipe Israel off the map. I'm talking about it's a democracy, and the people in charge of it, the government by election, has got to go. They're endangering the entire world with the crap they're yelling in Iran's direction. Iran does that, but I expect that from Iran because they got a criminal cartel in charge of the place. I expect better from Israel. It's an actual democracy.
Yeah, they're the ones that want to model themselves after us. So in that regard, why should we be surprised?
Yeah.
They're taking us a little too literally.
Yeah, our politics, that George W. Bush was not a role model. Let's get that out there for Iran or for
hated him. Why did we reelect him? I don't know. I think he committed fraud in Ohio, but we hated him.
You remember the guy that ran against him? I think we mentioned him earlier on the show.
You might be seeing him coming in next week, actually. Look for the big, stupid-looking, doughy face guy with the retarded white-haired haircut there.
Right, yeah.
Droning on, I think that Israel...
No, but I'm saying, Joe, you saw the guy, you're saying why we elected him, you saw the guy that ran against him, didn't you?
No, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, right, yeah. You can't tell them apart, that's my point. They're just...
Well,
yeah,
like I said, white-haired, doughy-faced guys, yeah, that pretty much describes both of them.
And that talk like they're in the third grade. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
Well, George had a little bit of a halting manner when he was speaking, and it was a little folksy, you see. He was talking about putting food on your family and how is our kids getting educated.
Educated. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have the richest, most powerful country in the world still be represented by these assholes. It really is. It's pathetic. And what we have going on up there, really, it's not much better now. The only thing that makes me happy about it, the only redeeming factor, is now they're not all marching to the same drum. Now you have competing idiocy, as opposed to just unilateral, hey, we got to get those terrorists. And terrorists are dangerous. They're going to kill all Americans. It's just like, stop. I just feel my IQ dropping listening to you.
I thought it was kind of funny that we went through this whole thing with Syria, and that's the other thing is that in 60 Minutes, Kerry was having to defend once again the idea of going to Syria, and it's just like, okay, wait a minute. And he was like responding to, well, we're trying to learn. The American people have obviously learned the Iraq lesson. I'm like, yeah, have you, motherfucker? Who voted for the war? Who now walks around going, what a mistake it was? Yeah, why did you vote for it then?
It's a learning disability.
And then why are you now going, oh, let's totally bomb Syria? That won't be the same thing. And it's like, even if it's another Libya, do we want another Libya? Are you kidding me? It's just, what's wrong with these guys? They have their heads just completely up their ass or what?
But it won't be another Libya. It will be another Iraq, just because demographically and geographically it's another Iraq. It's not another Libya.
It does look like one, yeah.
It's definitely going to be. It would be another Iraq. It's a guarantee. Libya doesn't have chemical weapons. Libya is a lot smaller. Libya is in a different continent. Libya is different politically. I mean, everything there. Syria's similarity is to Iraq, not to Libya. What we want to do may be different, maybe similar to Libya, but Syria is similar to Iraq. Yeah. So there's no argument there. It would turn into Iraq. I'm glad we didn't go there. There's one other thing I wanted to address, and I kind of want to get your view on this before I give anybody mine. What do you think? Okay. Yeah, imagine that, right?
You're asking me a question. This would be interesting.
Well, yeah, we don't do that very much, and we should. We should do that more. What do you think of the food stamp debacle? And let's not worry about the agricultural subsidies attached. Just itself, what they've done, the way they've passed that bill and that regulation, because I think that's part of this whole legislation, not regulation.
Remind me the specifics. I just know that they were trying to reduce it.
See, they weren't trying to reduce it as in, okay, we're going to cut food stamps. It didn't work that way. What they said is we're going to pass tighter regulations on food stamp. It's actually technically called SNAP now. Yeah. We're going to pass tighter regulations on SNAP that allegedly will keep a significant proportion of current recipients out of the system. So they're not cutting the benefit, from what I understand. What they're doing is they're tightening the regulations. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. They changed the qualifying statistics, so I guess they did take a few people off of it. There's no benefit
reduction. To be even poorer to get it, in other words.
To be even poorer to get it, and it's not just plain like poverty. It's more specific. Like you can't be. I forget the specifics. I'm not going to look them up right now. But there's basically different qualifying criteria, which make it more difficult. There's a few more regulations, like trying to catch fraud, and you have to be in some sort of education program or something that's supposed to get you back to work, basically, and make you more money. For some cases, for people who are basically work capable.
There's some kind of means test or something now.
No, there's always been a means test. The means test has changed, has become more specific, and there's also a requirement that if you're someone that's able to work, like if you're disabled, you don't fall under this, or if you're a child, you don't fall under this, but able-bodied adults who receive food stamps because of low income and whatever else, they're now required to be in some government course that's going to increase their income, basically.
Oh, jeez.
Government accredited course, government approved. It's not government run.
Well, I mean, I think it's typical. They want to they want to start culling down those numbers, but it's interesting they don't. This is the thing that really galls me, is that no one analyzes why. Everyone, the one line that pissed me off the most during the election was Obama being the food stamp president.
Food stamp president.
That is the biggest load of horse shit. To hang that around just his neck, it's an indictment of the entire system that
it is.
So many people need it. And whether or not, and why is a thing that we disagree on, but you can't deny the fact that people are poor right now because of their fucking around. And because of the system that we've built collapsing.
Oh, yeah.
Right or wrong. And a lot of the underpinnings of what happened in 2008 have only gotten worse, and we're going to have another one of those again, mark my words.
Oh, yeah.
But that aside, why are people broke? Because the system sucks, and the economy's anemic as hell. It hasn't really recovered. We've had sort of a paper recovery. The stock market is doing okay, but if you notice, any time they talk, even hint about even reducing QE, it drops like 1,000 points. It's
not 1,000 points, but it does drop. Yeah,
it drops a few hundred pretty quickly, and so it's just like, well, what kind of recovery is this? It's really just artificial, it seems to me, and it's so fragile, seemingly. But obviously, and here's the problem, and they're already calling people down. Food stamps it's a shitty program as it is.
It is. I concur.
I think the most recent person, the CEO of Panera Bread, tried to live off it for a week or a month or something like that. He couldn't do it. He was hungry all the time, he said. And why is that? Because the only thing that food stamps are qualified to buy, and with the money that you get, is empty carbs and sugar. You don't get any actual, you can't buy meat. You can't buy vegetables most of the time. It's either too expensive.
Where do you get this idea? I've never heard of this. You can't get vegetables or meat with food stamps? You can.
Or at least you can, but for as far as dollars stretching,
it's expensive. Yes. Okay.
Way more expensive. So it's basically what it works out as, and I forget the dollars and cents. I couldn't actually break it down for you cent by cent right now. But the things that you would to maximize your dollar, it just happens, if you draw a Venn diagram, to be the things that you buy to maximize that dollar are things that already get huge amounts of agricultural subsidies in the first place. Well, so it's kind of a double whammy in a lot of cases. So it's a shitty program, and really it's only another corporate handout anyway, and already is not good enough, and then they're cutting it even more. It's just kind of, the little guy can't win. They're just caught between two elephants fighting.
Yeah, let me kind of fill in some of the gaps there, Joe, about what you're saying. See, my view on food stamps is it's kind of the Obamacare of the 20th century. It's even worse than Social Security. Not for its idea, I'm not saying we should deny health care to the poor.
Feeding people who can't afford it is a good idea.
I have no problem with feeding the hungry. Right. I have a problem with how it's done. Because what happens is these corporate cartels wrap themselves around these programs like a cancer. Yeah. So it's like a cancer wrapping itself.
Dictate how they're written to begin.
Right, and then it's the way it's written it's like a cancer wrapped around a major artery. You want to cut it, but you'll bleed to death.
Right.
So what's going on with these? And then as soon as someone wants to question food stamps, I'm not saying I agree with what the Republicans are doing here, but when you say, look, it's a bad program, we need to replace it with something a lot more effective and, again, a lot more locally based. As soon as you say something like that, you have this huge minority of Americans, probably about 30-35%, that go apeshit. Oh my God, you're a crazy Republican and you want to deny those people food. I didn't say that. I said this is a corporatocracy, and this is a corporate handout, and it helps the corporations, and it actually perpetuates food insecurity and hunger in this country. But they're not listening enough to hear you say that. They're all about making their memes that you don't touch food stamps because food stamps are for the poor. And the corporations are sitting there silently applauding. It's like, grow up, get educated, understand the program. So I'm going to explain it for our listeners. Food stamps came around in the 30s during the Great Depression. And one of the major reasons for the Great Depression was an overabundance of food, a surplus. It wasn't too little, it was too much.
Wheat, specifically. Yeah, right. It was one major one.
Yes, we'd gotten way too good at growing food and distributing it to the point that farmers could not make any money. Now,
to pause for just a sec, the technological revolution was the ability, the mechanical plowing ability that came around at that time. You could all of a sudden have huge tracts of land and plow all of it in like a day, where it used to just be like one guy with a horse dragging a plow around. You could be on a tractor plowing acres and acres per day. So people were growing wheat, and there was a few bumper years in a row where there was a lot of rain and wheat was kind of scarce and they were making money hand over fist. So what did they think? Hey, we're making all this money. Let's buy more land and grow more wheat. Land was cheap. Wheat was expensive. There you go. And then the next thing you know, we have huge tracts of land, no native grassland anymore, dust blowing everywhere, and too much fucking wheat.
I agree, but there's a little more to it than that, but that's the basic gist. So what I'm saying with this is, so you have, the other big thing also is refrigeration. You could preserve it a lot better. So now food stamps were introduced. This is not a secret. Look into it, research this, find out where they came from. Yes, they were a means of feeding the poor. They were also intended as an agricultural subsidy. This is why they're part of the Farm Bill.
To sell the wheat that they had.
Hold on. To basically bump up food prices. They were intended to drive up the prices of food so that farmers could profit, so that the farms would not go bankrupt. They were intended to do that. I want to make that very, very clear. Now we're talking about solving a problem of hunger and food insecurity with a program that's 80 years old, whose intention was to drive up the prices of food. Am I the only one that sees a problem here?
Well, he was trying to accomplish both. But you're right.
Not. FDR was a scumbag, and he was in bed with massive agricultural corporations and mega unions, and he was not trying to solve a problem. I will not give him the benefit of the doubt for his intentions. I know better. But regardless of what his intentions were, the outcome was terrible. Now, what we really needed, if you think about this, this is going to be mind-boggling to a lot of people, but you have to listen to me through the end. Most of the developed world, Western Europe, Israel, countries that you could kind of compare to us, Canada, Australia, the way they do their agriculture, it's free market collective agriculture. Most of those places have agricultural collectives that are based on the Tolstoy system, a lot of systems actually that were the predecessors of the USSR, the ideologies, not the way the USSR did it, but actual complete voluntary participation collective farms. They're cooperatives, because that whole individual farmer thing kind of burned out in the 30s. It wasn't effective anymore. Now, in the USSR, they basically had government-run farms. They called them collective farms, but they weren't, and they worked terribly. That was the worst agricultural system ever anywhere in the world.
Because it was dictated centrally, yeah.
But that's sort of what we have here, is dictated centrally. It's not quite as bad. We have a few massive agricultural corporations, and the reason we have that is because FDR's bullshit plan, rather than letting the market naturally transition to those cooperatives, which is what happened everywhere else in the free world, he introduced all these bullshit subsidies that the biggest corporate players could instantly adjust to and take over the market. So that's what gave us Monsanto. That's what gave us ConAg. This is where this shit comes from. It's not quite as bad as the USSR, but it's the next worst thing. We want to talk about one thing Europe does better than us? Agriculture.
I can maybe argue with you on philosophy, but I can argue with you on history, and that's one where, yeah, I've read the same thing, and in fact, it didn't stop, for the record, folks, it did not stop the individual farmer, even though he sold it on the backs of them, the farmer with a family, he lives on the land, he works the land. That was the image that was used to sell this program. It did not stop them from going under. They went
as
anyway.
Usual.
And the banks took over, and what happened? They were able to sell that land off at a pittance to people like they ended up being the Monsantos and ConAgras of today.
And those farmers, naturally, I mean, there would have been fewer, but the ones that remained, the best ones, would have needed to come together and form these communes. It happened everywhere else in the world. Communes are okay as long as they're voluntary. That's very important. That's why you have voluntarist libertarians. That's what they believe. Communal is fine, but no one's forcing you. You want to leave, you take your share and you leave. That's the free market commune, free market cooperation. Now, to continue to today with food stamps. What do food stamps do in the modern world? What you said about them not really being able to live off of it, they're not really intended for you to live off of it. I mean, if you get rid of food stamps today, not saying we should do it, but let's assume we get rid of food stamps today. Those people that have food stamps, they'll still buy food. You have to buy food. Most people on food stamps do have an income. They're not homeless people on the streets with nothing. They have an income. They're having a hard time making ends meet. It's supposed to be a handout to help you buy food. It's not necessarily supposed to cover your entire food bill. That's not its intention. So if you get rid of food stamps, let's say, purely theoretically, people will still buy food. And food is expensive. Only now that income the food stamp income is not guaranteed to the large corporations. My biggest problem with food stamps is who accepts them. It's large grocery distributors.
Right. It's only grocery stores
And
like
where
that.
do they get their food? They get it from large agricultural corporations. And that's a huge, huge chunk of their profit because it's guaranteed.
You can't use it at farmers markets. That's the biggest indictment of food stamps.
Right. Or even Whole Food stores.
Right.
So now if you have this competition, what happens when you have competition? You have more production, and the prices will go down. That's what I want to see. I want to see the little farmers, and I want to see the Whole Food stores actually able to compete with these commercial grocers. And let's see what happens to Monsanto. Let's see them hold their own in an actual fucking free market where the food stamps is not upsetting the system. Now, if we had, think about this, we had too much food in this country 80 years ago. How do we possibly have a food shortage today? This is mind-boggling. It's completely regulation-induced. Now, let's go back to the legislation. Is it doing that? No, it's not. Because these neocons have a hard-on for anything that looks like a cut, but they have no balls to actually uncorporatize the system.
Right.
So it's like,
you don't see them cutting the agricultural subsidies, for example. Like I said, they were trying to cut the food stamps at the same time they were increasing the agri-subsidies.
Right. Now, for one thing, these are not even really cuts. They're trying to make the system more efficient. Call Ronald Reagan, ask him with the war on drugs how well that works. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make food stamps work when it's not working. And they're saying, oh, look, it's the fraud. No, food stamps is actually the least defrauded federal handout in the country. Because there's not a whole lot you can do with it. Really, to commit fraud, you have to lie on your application. But you're not getting a whole lot, and there's not a whole lot you can do with it.
You're frauding them out of $45 a month? Like what?
Really, it's not worth it. The other thing people do, and this does happen sometimes, is when the grocers don't check it, what is and isn't eligible, and they end up buying alcohol and cigarettes and things that are not qualified. I can see where that's an issue, but honestly, that's not the fraud there is very, very, very.
That's got to be the exception rather than the rule.
It really is, just because it's not worth it. So they're trying to go after that, which is a very neocon thing to do, rather than deal with the actual problem, to make themselves look like they're better than the Democrats, who just claim there is no problem. This is the issue here. So my thing is, again, you're going to have people, even if you do what I'm suggesting, you get rid of food stamps, not instantly, but you phase them out. And you let food price, and you get rid of agricultural subsidies completely. I don't see why we have to subsidize these mega corporations now, 80 years later. It makes no sense.
Well, you're right. Again, it was sold on the backs of mom and pop farmer who's losing their farm, and their kids have nowhere to live, and blah 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 blah.
Isn't that how Obamacare was sold
anymore?
Isn't that how Obamacare was sold too? Though, think about this. So
it's not them that's getting this subsidy, folks. It's not.
It's not. Let the prices drop. Let there be more local food production, and people who still have food insecurity, and they'll be there, but there will be quantitatively a lot fewer of them. Numbers do matter. It's not a yes or no question. Then we can figure out what to do with them. I think this is something that you could very easily solve on a local or state level. Most of the states in the U.S. do grow food. There's plenty of local growers, there's plenty of local market. The idea that you have to basically give someone a handout that's poor in San Diego to buy food that was grown in Oklahoma, it's kind of stupid. I mean, come on, that's not. That's
it grows a lot of its own food.
But it's an example. What I'm saying is it's inefficient.
No, you're right, though. It would come from Oklahoma. That's why it's stupid.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
California doesn't need, you know what I mean? We export all kinds of different food. We're like the biggest food exporters in the country.
Yes. So, as I'm saying, same idea. And again, I'm saying all the things that shouldn't be said, but this is reality. And again, the problem is not necessarily the money; it's the regulation. But the reason, and like I said in the beginning, and I'm loving this. For you, it's just you're like, oh God, here we go again. But for me, no, this is very enjoyable to me. This whole shutdown situation, because even though neither of them is really suggesting a solution that works, they disagree to a point where neither of them is taken serious anymore. And people are waking up and they're looking at this and saying, okay, they're both idiots, but neither of them is right. So while they're derailing the system and slowing down and they're in gridlock, let's figure out how to make this actually work. Let's actually vote in politicians that are saying something intelligent. So honestly, the mutually assured destruction between the major parties is what I'm getting a kick out of. That needs to happen. When you only have one party and it tries to look like it's two different parties, that's far more dangerous to me.
They're covering themselves in piss quite effectively.
Didn't CNN say that Congress hit a new low today or yesterday in its approval ratings? They're already in the single digits. How do you do that?
Maybe they've invented a new negative number scale.
Yeah, so yeah, can you have a negative approval rating?
Now, well, no, see, here's what they did. Now 0 to 10%, they've added 10% brackets to each of those, so now 0 to 10 is actually 0 to 100. So now they can fall, it's really like 2.1, but it's 20-some%, it's 10%, but really it's 1.1%.
See, I thought they did it differently. I thought they added a question to all the polls. If all the entire U.S. Congress and the entire U.S. Senate were standing on a bridge and you're holding the detonator, would you push the red button? And for anyone that answered yes, they basically subtracted another point from their popularity, and they ended up with about negative 30.
Only a point for mass bridge killing? Wow, that's...
Well, for everyone that does that. No, just proportionally speaking. And they did that, they weighted that against the approval rating, and they got about a negative 25% approval rating now. It's great.
There you go. It's close out food stamps. It almost would be better if they just sent them a check every month, but...
Well, see, that's right. Cash benefits. Okay, now, the problem with cash benefits is then you run into a fraud issue. Because, again, this is sold on the backs of starving children and Americans without food. And hate to sound like a personal responsibility Republican here, but a lot of people will abuse that. A lot of people, not all of them, not even a majority, but a significant minority of the people receiving these benefits are probably in that situation because they are irresponsible. Because they don't take care of the children. Again, not saying all of them, most of them are not, but there's a significant minority that is. So if you just give them cash, they will use it on drugs. They will use it to go party, and their kids will still be hungry.
I question that. That's a talking point that I hear a lot from the right, but if you look to Florida, where Rick Scott, the guy in charge of the drug company, he, by law, made welfare recipients use to prove they weren't on drugs to get welfare. Uh-huh. He profited from that one. He found that, 96% of people passed the drug test.
That's because they know how to get past the drug test. It's not hard.
But come on, isn't this just another, it's shit like that they do that just makes it look mean-spirited, and especially the fact that it's his company doing the drug test. That's awfully fucking...
I see, this is where, again, this is where we agree on intentions, but we don't necessarily agree on outcomes. If you give people handouts, especially ones that are not controlled, like, okay, here's a cash benefit for food, you're going to have, I didn't say it's most of them, I said a significant minority that's going to abuse the benefit. And they don't have to blow it on drugs to abuse it, by the way. That's just drugs. You can actually be on drugs and still be very, very responsible with your money. Those two things, he's just picking on drugs because he has the drug test company. He's not looking at the macro problem. You're going to have a significant minority that abuses this. And that raises two very serious problems. The first is an economic problem. They're abusing it, so now you're going to have more people signing up for food stamps because now they're no longer food stamps. It's like you said, it's very little money. The reason there's little food stamp fraud is because it's very little money, and there's not a whole lot you can do with it. Now, if you're getting even an extra, $120 in cash a month, you're going to have fraud explode into people that are not even on food stamps now. They're going to find a way to qualify because it's very easy to lie and cheat the system. So that proportion is going to expand. Secondly is the political problem, because people are going to witness this. It's not anyone's little secret. And you're going to have a lot more people opposed to food stamps and to feeding the hungry because that's what they're going to associate it with. So it's going to be bad for the people that actually need it. This is why this shit does not belong at the federal level. Because if you have this on a community level and you have communes and collectives that are growing the food, or even in a small state, if they witness fraud and they witness this kind of behavior, everyone knows each other. Everyone knows who's doing it, what grocers are not paying attention and whatnot. It's a lot easier to stop fraud more on a cultural level than having to involve federal law enforcement, which is very ineffective. That's what I'm saying. Fraud is a bad thing. These abuses, this overutilization, freeloading is a bad thing. Just because how we deal with it is even worse than itself does not mean that it doesn't happen. Does not mean that it's not a huge problem.
Maybe. I think this is a good note to end up on, but one little update before we do. The Senate has rejected, predictably, the latest House bill.
Really?
So we're an hour away from a shutdown, I think,
did
hour
the
and
sun set?
15.
Joe, did the sun set?
Well, I mean, and it's hard to see this going any differently.
Here's the thing. Let's talk a little bit actually about predictions before we sign off here. It's the last thing I want to do. First of all, like I said, I'm not predicting how long this shutdown will last. It's a very difficult prediction to make. I also really can't predict the policy outcome. I mean, yes, they're jerking the doll back and forth, but at some point, they're going to have to come to some kind of agreement. This isn't like the gun control bill or whatever, or the Syria where they could just let it die. This is something that they have to come to a consensus on, or there's no government funding. They can't just keep bouncing it back and forth and say, okay, I guess we didn't pass it. That can't happen.
Right.
So someone's going to have to cave. It's going to be very interesting to me to watch what happens, because I feel like the force on both sides is finally even. So they're going to have to actually sit down and negotiate, as opposed to just having a few people on one side or the other cave to the other side, which has happened multiple times. And I feel like when that happens, what I'm hoping to see, I'm hoping that it somehow destroys Obamacare, because I despise that program. But more importantly than that, I want to see what happens politically, because my prediction from a few weeks ago, if the listeners remember, and if you remember, Joe, is that this would fundamentally change the partisan arrangement. After this, the Republican Party will be completely different. And if those neocons can pull together enough votes in the House to pass this, I think there's going to be a huge I think the realignment might just happen. I think they might end up forced out of the Democratic Party before the next election even happens, or right after. So I think that the final realignment for the Republican Party, this may very well complete it. How exactly, I'm not sure. The outcome I would not want to see is the parties being more partisan as a result of this. Them actually both sticking to their guns, finding some sort of compromise, working this out, but they're actually more partisan. I'm actually somewhat disappointed that this hasn't split the parties. It has united them, because it's wrapped itself around Obamacare, which, even though it shouldn't be, is a very partisan issue. So, again, I can't predict how long this is going to go on, and I think that a lot of the fallout from it, especially if it drags on for a few days, a lot of the fallout from it we will not see until the next election, a year from now, the midterm elections. And everyone will be talking about who basically Americans are going to punish, which party. My prediction is it's a Democratic Party that gets punished, but we'll have to wait and see. So there's all my prophecies on that.
Guess we'll find out. I don't really have prophecies. I just want to say, just send one message to Congress: grow up, children. But that's just me.
Well, but again, I hear you, and I'm liable to think the same way, but I also understand why they're doing it. If anything, my message to the Democrats would be, what are you thinking? This didn't work for Bill Clinton in 1995, and you're going to have the same thing happen to you.
That Obamacare is law, so I mean, it's the Republicans that are trying to undo.
Doesn't matter. You think that matters to the average American? We're talking about strategy.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens.
What I'm saying is Obama or Harry Reid saying that, making that argument that you just made, Joe, it's not going to sell. It's not going to change anyone's minds. That's what I'm saying.
I think the Republicans, they rely on misinformation. They can have that happen, but that's just me. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
All right, thank you for being with us, and we'll catch you next time. I'm Neurotoxin.
I'm Dorian. See you later. Thank you for listening, Edge of Chaos. We can be found on Facebook at facebook.com/The Edge of Chaos. Also, our website is at edgeofchaospodcast.com. That's edgeofchaospodcast.com. Neurotoxin's blog can be found at neurotoxins with an S, FYG.blogspot.com. My blog is joeryansworld.blogspot.com. For Neurotoxin, I am Joe Ryan. Thank you for listening to Edge of Chaos.
Just a few years ago, our country had the largest surplus ever, $2 trillion. And now, just a few years later, we have the largest deficit ever, $3.5 trillion. That means we went through $5.5 trillion in just a few years, and nobody explained where the fuck it went. If we actually went through $5.5 trillion, you know what? Each one of us should have gotten a goddamn coupon. For shoes or a coat or whatever you need. So the federal government decided the way to make this money up was to have a $350 billion tax cut. Okay? And by the federal government, I mean Republicans and Democrats working together. And the only thing dumber than a Republican or a Democrat is when these pricks work together. We have a two-party system. The Democratic Party, which is a party of no ideas, and the Republican Party, which is a party of bad ideas. And the way it works is the Republican stands up in Congress and goes, I got a really bad idea. And the Democrat says, and I can make it shittier. These guys believe that a $350 billion tax cut will stimulate the economy. And they're full of shit. Because they don't know what stimulates the economy. The economy goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. Nobody knows why the fuck it happens. And I know this. Because I took economics. And I'd explain it to you. But I flunked that course. Not my fault. They taught it at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there is absolutely nothing that you can learn out of one bloodshot eye. After I flunked the first two tests, I grabbed the professor by the throat and I said, why are you teaching this shit at this ungodly hour? Are you trying to keep this stuff a secret?